Hello, and welcome to the podcast. This is Get in the Driver's Seat. We're telling stories about leadership moments in professional practice. I'm your host, Sandra Beckor, practice management coach at Beckor Management. Today, we're talking about the how and the why of doing DEI right. And to tackle what can be a difficult topic to grasp, I'm excited to introduce Michelle Davis, the founder and CEO of MVD Consulting, Inc., where she helps not-for-profit leaders and businesses create equitable, just, healthy, happy, and thriving workplaces. She's an educator at heart, has taught at several universities, and recently received the University of Toronto's Arbor Award. Michelle also serves her community as a board director at the Jamaican Canadian Association. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Sandra. So glad to be here.
It's a big topic.
Yeah, very big, very big.
Yeah, and sensitive. And as I was saying just before we hit the record button, I started this podcast 2 years ago and have been meaning to cover this topic ever since the beginning. So I'm just so glad to have met you, Michelle, and to feel sort of comfortable with your approach on this. It's very delicate to just, as you were sharing before about your approach. Actually, why don't you just repeat that? Because I feel like that's a good way to get this conversation going, what you said to me about your approach.
Absolutely, Sandra. So my approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion is that I want to invite people into the conversation. I don't want to exclude people. I don't want people to feel defensive. So I'm always thinking about ways to, what terminology to use or how to approach the subject matter in a way that people feel okay, because we all need to be part of the conversation, a part of this work in order to advance it. So that's how I approach it. So it's not I'm scolding or I'm being negative. Instead, I'm trying to approach it in a way that people feel comfortable and can enter into the conversations that we're having.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure that, sometimes people have good intentions, but they don't even know how to get started, or they don't know the right questions, or they don't feel comfortable asking the questions.
Yes. Yes. And we need to hear those questions. I was
Yeah.
at an event last night in the town of Ajax where I live. The anti-racism task force had a meeting, and there were two white community members sitting at my table. And they said that one gentleman said, my friends wouldn't feel comfortable coming here. We're not sure if there's a place for us to be as part of these, at this table, at these events and conversations, and hearing their perspectives and ensuring that there is space for them to talk about what is allyship and what can they do within their own communities with their neighbors and their friends, as well as on a larger scale. So it was a really important conversation, and I was really happy that they attended so that we could share that space together.
And I love that you just shared that here.
Yeah.
Just such a relatable little figment of the story, right?
Great.
How many of us have thought, oh, should I? Shouldn't I? I don't know if I'll be welcomed, or if people will see my good intentions. I like the idea of allyship in so many different shapes and forms, and this is a really good place for it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this with why it's in the interest. So I work with professional service firms, and that those decisions are typically in the hands of the owner, the partners, the managing partner. So why is it even in their interest to do DEI right?
What a
I,
beautiful, great question to start with, Sandra. It's so important that we are all committed to advancing diversity, equity, inclusion in workplaces, because the research continues to show that organizations and businesses that do this right tend to be more profitable, tend to be more productive. Their employees are more satisfied and more engaged, and so they stay longer. So it is important that it's done right as a core business operation. It's not something that that team down the hallway does or that person with the title does. It's something that everyone contributes to, because it creates workplaces and societies where we all feel welcomed and where we all feel comfortable, and that allows everyone to thrive. So it's really important that everyone is committed to the work. The work isn't easy, as we know. It's not a quick fix. I think sometimes people are looking for, okay, we'll do this training session and then we're done. That's just, the scratching the surface, really. There's a lot of work that needs to be put into it, especially if you want to go really deep. If you want to see longer term changes within workplaces, within societies, it requires a really big long-term commitment to achieving it. And sometimes it's taking baby steps. Right? It's not always doing huge, big things. It could just be small things and just chipping away at it. And eventually those small things add up to big changes, then big advances along that DEI journey.
Yeah, okay. So some of what I just heard from you about the benefits, which is important, it's a motivator, right?
Hmm.
These these professional service firms, they're not doing volunteer work. They need to be motivated to do the work because, as you said rightly, it's hard. This is hard.
Yes,
And so
yes,
what I heard from you is improving culture. Culture is huge in professional service firms. Like the value of that alone is huge.
yes.
Retaining top talent and that that you can look at as a financial equation. Okay, so I save money on hiring, onboarding, training, but also that's a point of difference. If you're able to keep the top talent in your company, and it's like imagine all those nights of not having sleepless nights because you're worried someone's going to leave or they did leave and now you have to do double duty. That alone is huge.
Oh, absolutely, Sandra. And so getting people to understand that, as you said, it differentiates your organization for others. You can become a leader in your industry by, right, doing DEI and doing it well. So you're able to not only retain top talent, but you're able to recruit top talent. So a lot of people are now looking at, so, when organizations are hiring, they're thinking how this candidate fits into our culture. Well, that candidate's doing the same about you. Is this somewhere where I want to go? Do it. Will I feel safe? Will I, be promoted? Can I see myself there long term? Well, if you not only say that you do diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but you have evidence that you're actually, advancing on it, that makes you attractive as an organization to that top talent. And I also think that investors, funders, your external stakeholders are also wanting to work with and to invest in organizations that are doing this work and doing it well. So again and again, in whatever metric you look at, it is important that organizations are doing this work.
Okay, so this is a good segue to get into what does it mean to do it right?
Mm,
Well, there's a lot of pressure on some sectors, not all professional service firms, and also not necessarily all sizes. Some size, larger firms may feel more pressure. I don't know. And so they feel pressure to check some boxes, right? And do some level of DEI policy, but not necessarily reap the benefit because they're not necessarily following through on making it actually work. So that's what we mean by doing DEI right. So Michelle, just can you think of any stories where you were just alluding to um, the person who is looking for a job, who might be considered top talent, who's evaluating different options, accounting, law, architects, whatever it is, and they're looking at their culture and they want to choose a firm that is suitable for them and this means something to them. Can you think of any stories where actually the firm benefited because they did DEI right?
mhm. I can think of, a client that I worked with a few years ago. They had, some issues with some of their stakeholders feeling that, racism was occurring in the organization and it wasn't being handled well. So they invited myself and a colleague to come in, and what we started with was listening. So we did listening circles. What are people's experiences? What's happening on the ground? We held a number of sessions, and then we were able to meet with the executives and share our findings, and from there then map out how they would address the issues that needed to be addressed. So, and it's important to start with that listening. So sometimes people start, as you said, with the statements, with the policies, but sometimes they haven't checked in with whether it's staff or volunteers or alumni, whatever, depending on the makeup of the organization. Who are your important stakeholders in the workplace, in the organization? What are their experiences? Because these are your external champions. These are the people who are talking about your organization. You want them to be out there as your ambassadors. So checking in with them, asking them what's working, what's not working. And so by doing that, inviting them into the conversation, letting them know that what they shared has been heard and is being taken into account. And then we put together an advisory group, an equity and inclusion advisory group, where again, some of the key members who were, had the time and interest could participate and really help to advance the work. And I think as a result of this, the organization sent out an update a couple months ago. So, 4 years after starting this work, to see where they've grown and how they've been able to attract different funders, different corporate partners, new persons who are coming into the organization. You can see that by doing this work, and the leadership, they were really nervous. They were really afraid they were going to make a mistake. They were going to say something wrong. They were going to offend people. So part of the work was also coaching them and supporting them and letting them know, okay, you probably will. There's a good chance you're going to do something wrong, but that's okay. You're going to be, people are okay with that. You make mistakes, you learn from it. You're committed to not repeating the same mistakes, but it's part of being transparent, right? We don't need to be perfect. And so as a result of being transparent, being committed, being willing to do the work, even though it was difficult, a few years later, they're their truth and reconciliation work that they've been doing with Indigenous community members, Indigenous elders. They've really, they've become a bit of a shining light. They're standing out in their industry because of this work that they've done.
Fascinating. And what was the life cycle of that? Like how long from initial effort to starting to see some kind of benefit to starting to see bigger benefit? Can you give us some kind of a timeline on that?
Sure. I would say at least 6 months in, they started seeing some of that benefit. And then it started leapfrogging, after a year, even seeing the difference in the confidence levels with the executives that we were working with. After a year, how they were able to start owning the work. So they weren't just sitting back and letting the external consultants kind of take away the responsibility. They were able to, feel a bit more emboldened as they move forward with the work with more courage, and, more humility. And so, 6 months, you kind of see, okay, the ship is kind of turning around. A year, the ship has done the 180. And after that, it's going in the direction it should be going in. So again, it's a longer term commitment, but they are willing to do that. And as a result, they could see the changes at the organizations. And I think people outside looking in could also see those changes.
So as you were describing this story, Michelle, I was wondering, if you initiate something like this, are there people who potentially are so hesitant to share their views that it creates an obstacle to the process right from the beginning?
Great question. So I often have it, some people are hesitant, but again, I think because of the environment that I create in my work where people feel okay. And also as a consultant, I don't know if this is your experience, Sandra, but I say that you're an insider outsider. You have that position, that perspective. So sometimes people will say things to me that they may not say to their boss or to the executives in their organization. But because I'm not their supervisor, I don't sign their paychecks. So they may feel more comfortable sharing that with me. So as a result, usually people are okay sharing, even if it's not a popular opinion. They eventually will feel okay to share that. And I'm okay when people share that unpopular opinion, because then when it's out in the open, we can unpack it, we can address it, I can reframe it, maybe help to shift some of their understanding, maybe offer some additional information that they may not have. Whether or not they change their position, I'm not responsible for that. None of us are responsible for that. But I do my part in, framing it, creating, providing some more information and support so that if they do choose to change their opinion, they have that information to do it. So usually people feel comfortable enough to share their opinions. And I like when they do that because then I can, as I said, unpack it with them.
Mhm. Yeah, I have, by the way, to answer your question, I have seen that. I think what we're talking about here really is creating a feeling of safety for, for people, especially if this is new to your firm, right? To talk about things that you haven't talked about before and you don't know if people will agree with you.
Right.
In the coaching work I do, which is about mindset, a couple of these self-sabotaging techniques will show up. Like if
Mhm.
you're a people pleaser, you don't want to displease the people in the room. So you're like, you know, filtering yourself.
Mhm.
The tendency to want to be a perfectionist also will show up. You mentioned that we don't need to be perfect.
Right, right.
And
Especially in leadership, right? I think there's an
yeah,
expectation that you're supposed to be perfect, but that puts so much pressure on people, right? To
yeah.
be perfect all the time. Yeah.
Well, and ironically, you spoke so beautifully about it that you don't need to be perfect. And ironically, some of the best leaders in the world, that's exactly what they are. They're just honest, right? They're like, okay, well, I am struggling with this thing, and they'll just put it out there as, maybe you can help me. This is the thing I would like to accomplish, but here's the thing I'm not actually good at yet.
Yes, yes. I love that how you said that. And again, it's that inviting people in. I don't know. That's why I have a team. That is why, right?
Right.
Right? So how can we figure this out together? And people, I think, really appreciate, I know myself appreciate that invitation in to bring my skills and expertise and help to figure out the way forward. So yeah, I think it's really important as a leader, that humility to say, yeah, I don't know everything. I don't want to know everything. I know my strengths and what I'm great at. I know what your strengths are. So let's tap into so that strength-based approach, I think is really important in this work too.
Mm. So recognizing everybody's strengths,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
just the people at the top. Basically, it's a more
exactly.
democratic way of looking at strengths.
I think so. I think so. And like this work is so huge. No one person, no one team should be responsible for achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we need everyone to see, or as many people as possible to see how their role, how they can carry a little bit of the work, shoulder a little bit of the responsibility, and be willing to, yeah, to bring their strengths to the table to really move, to really advance the work.
Michelle, can you make that a little bit more concrete? Because it feels like an abstract idea. So where you say, okay, let's say we have a 25-person firm, and maybe there's three people at the top that are considered the leadership group. How do you get maybe all 25 or a significant number of people to feel like they have a role in this? What does that look like?
Great question, Sandra. So it could be things like, so there might be a committee that's that's going to take the lead on it. That committee can, have the work plan, start mapping out some key metrics, etc. And then they're going to share maybe quarterly updates to the wider team to get their feedback, their input. Part of that work plan is seeing who is responsible for different areas of the work. So who's responsible for communications, who's responsible maybe for data collection, data analysis. Maybe there's someone in the firm that would chip in and offer those resources. Who's going to maybe stakeholder engagement, so who, with the outside wider community, who might take that on. Maybe what partners, we can't do everything, we don't want to do everything, but we have some key partners that we would love to tap into, their knowledge and expertise. So who are those folks? So again, mapping, looking at the various aspects of the work over maybe 3 to 5 years, and then showing spaces where people can contribute their knowledge and their skills as well. And maybe, oh, I know, someone could say, I know so and so. We don't have this internally, but I know where I can go externally to get that information. Or I volunteer on this committee outside of work and we've done X. Maybe I can share that report or maybe make an introduction to the leadership at that organization so you can learn, we can learn a little bit from them or maybe invite them into one of our meetings. So again, I think if you open it out, because again, it touches every aspect of a business or an organization. So that means every team within that organization has a role to play. But again, it's just thinking of how and engaging people in their areas of responsibility, their areas of expertise to really drive the work forward.
Thank you. That made it so much easier to picture how this actually would roll out.
Right.
And you know what I love about that description, Michelle, is like, okay, so if you think about a law firm where they all have sort of consistent types of experience and skills, this is another way of looking at those skills, right? Who's the outgoing one? Who's connected to people who might be comfortable talking about this and engaging? Who's the one that loves data? And so they're all lawyers, maybe, but they all have these other sides of their personality and other things they actually are interested in doing.
Right, right, exactly. And just so it's already there. All these wonderful skill sets, these wonderful strengths are already there, but sometimes we're not tapping into them because again, we kind of get siloed, even in diversity, equity, inclusion work. I'm seeing more organizations are creating DEI teams, bringing on staff. It's really exciting to see. I haven't seen this ever, in Canada or in the Greater Toronto area where I reside. But the work cannot reside, it should not reside with those folks. There's also been a lot of burnout on those teams because they're expected to do everything, but they shouldn't approach the work as, we're going to do it. No, we're going to bring in people because a lot of people are interested in the work, particularly people from equity deserving groups and wanting to contribute. So again, it's creating that space and opportunity for people to do that.
So I've read a lot as sort of consultant coach, just interested in this area. Obviously, this is not my area of expertise, but I've read things about how DEI can lead to better performance, whether you look at that financially or whether you look at that as teams working better together, they coordinate better, they gel together better. But I've also read how just doing DEI, as in, checking the box, making sure you have the diverse team, you have representatives of women and, different underrepresented groups on your team, that alone will not necessarily deliver those improvements. And so I think this is where sometimes people don't understand what DEI right means.
Mm-hmm.
So can you sort of talk to sort of the bridge between those, just doing it and actually making it go far enough that you see some benefit?
Definitely. So yeah, increasing that diverse representation, and that's the D in DEI, right? So ensuring that, as you said, Sandra, that folks from underrepresented communities are reflected in your team. Not only just on, and sometimes people just do that frontline. So your frontline team may be very diverse. Like we see this like in healthcare and hospitals, for example. Their nursing staff, their healthcare staff may be very diverse. But when you start moving up into leadership positions, that diversity, right, drops significantly. So looking at diversity in leadership, management, leadership, executive positions as well, looking at who gets promoted, why and why. We mentioned it earlier about retention. So who stays in the organization, but also importantly, who leaves and why. So again, we start at that diversity, that representation, but we can take that a little bit deeper to really understand the full story of equity within the organization. So doing DEI well really means not just, remaining at the surface of the work, but going in deeper. So again, we looked at, hiring and retention, who gets hired, who gets promoted, who stays, and why. So looking at your data from your exit interviews for people who leave, understanding why. Was there instance of inequity or discrimination? You find that a lot. People leave because they don't feel welcome, they don't feel safe, or they experience discrimination that no one addressed. So, and sometimes they won't say anything until that exit interview. Is that sometimes the only time that as an organization, you get that feedback. So looking at that feedback that you get, and there's lots of feedback that organizations get these days, and then decide what you're going to do with it. How, if someone is saying that they didn't feel welcomed and safe in their team or in the workplace, how is the workplace going to address that? That's important feedback. So maybe it is starting a mentorship program, right? What is your onboarding process? Do you, in that 90 days, match up an employee with a senior person in the organization to help them kind of navigate? I know when I've started in some organizations, it's taken me 6 months to feel like I understand what I'm supposed to be doing here. And, so getting people lined up with someone when they can ask questions and feel comfortable and start feeling connected will really help in that retention. And then productivity. So the better you understand your role, then the better you'll be able to perform your role. So that's one area, one example of where, doing DEI well. Some other things might be setting up employee resource groups. So larger organizations sometimes will set up committees for employees from equity deserving communities where they can come together, talk about issues, plan activities, plan events. And again, it's just another way for people to feel that they're welcome and that they belong within the workplace. Employee resource groups have been around in the US for a longer time than here in Canada. They're more recent. But again, they can be spaces where, again, not only do people feel connected and that they belong, but some of that mentorship can happen and more importantly, sponsorship. So if there is an employee in a group who's working with maybe a senior manager or executive on this committee, you might be able to say, oh, you know what, there's an opportunity coming up. Michelle has been sitting on this committee. I'm getting to know Michelle a lot better. I would love to see her apply to this opportunity that's coming up. So you're getting to know your team or maybe you're working for people from other teams. Because again, sometimes we only know people in our department or our team. In these employee resource groups, you may be working with people that you haven't had a chance to work with before, and you're getting to see their strengths and their capabilities. So, that's another area where diversity, equity, and inclusion can really create those pathways for people to be promoted, to advance to leadership. There's other things that workplaces can do around DEI. Supplier diversity is another one. Who do you do business with as an organization? Is it diverse? Done an event last week for women business owners, and the data shows that only 7.5% of corporate contracts are won by businesses led by folks from equity deserving communities. So whether it's people with disabilities, folks who are 2S LGBTQ+, racialized folks, newcomer, indigenous peoples, 7.5%. That's way too low. So again, thinking about that as part of, and we often don't talk about that, supplier diversity as part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But again, really important when we're a little bit further along from maybe you started the training, maybe it's looking at the hiring metrics, as you mentioned, Sandra, but there's so many different pathways after that to continue to advance on your DEI journey and really see that growth that is transformative. And that will then, lead to increased productivity, increased profitability, increased reputation, and leadership in the area.
Amazing. So the things you're talking about sound to me like they encourage career path in a way that's fair and recognizes, people who really are ambitious and who are really delivering and growing and giving them opportunity that is aligned with that. How does it also encourage allyship, or how can you also encourage allyship?
Beautiful question. Allyship is so critical. It is so important to this work. And sometimes maybe people don't see how they can be allies to the work, but that's needed. So allyship ensures that persons who are not from equity deserving or equity seeking communities understand their roles in advancing equity for others. So sometimes it is, and often it is about, using your own power to help others. So what that could start with education and training. The session last night, someone said, I had to go and understand what my privilege is as a white woman. She said, for a number of years, she traveled within the global South, and she didn't understand how privileged she was in those spaces. And so she's taken the time to educate and to learn what that means. And another gentleman says, most of my friends would say, we're not privileged. Like, we've been fired, we've lost jobs, and so helping people to understand that, even though you've had maybe similar experiences, things may have been a little bit easier for you because maybe you're born in this country and you speak the language and you're from the majority group. And so there have been some opportunities that you've been able to realize without even thinking about them, that you've been able to tap into, that persons who are not from those communities or don't have those identities don't have. So then how do you then use that privilege, or how do you use the opportunities that you've been afforded to help others? So it might be, if you see something that is discriminatory, speaking out about it. So, often when I was in workplaces, I would question and challenge some of the behaviors of bullying and harassment that I either was experiencing or that I would see. But I was often disappointed that my colleagues didn't also speak up and speak out against it. So then, I was quickly seen as the difficult employee, or the, difficult or contentious employee, as opposed to if I had two or three of my colleagues also saying, that wasn't okay, what was said or what was done. It would have taken a huge burden off of me for always having, because it takes a lot of energy to always be the one speaking up and questioning and challenging. It would also validate my experiences, because sometimes, you're thinking, oh, was that a sexist comment? You start questioning yourself, right? Am I making this up? Was that racist? I didn't know, that comment didn't quite sit well with me, but maybe I'm being too sensitive. We often minimize things, right? However, if a colleague comes and says, yeah, I think that wasn't okay, I didn't like that, that would again go a long way in helping me to, helping people to feel safer and comfortable being able to do it. And then people then are using their positions of power or privilege, even when you don't see that you're in a position of power or privilege, to really share the burden. Right? Achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion is everyone's responsibility. So allies are important in sharing that responsibility, sharing that burden, because really we can't advance on this work, on this journey, without the role of important allies.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to tie together a couple of the points that you brought up. And, I'm thinking about my own experiences as you're talking, Michelle, and I've had a couple of these encounters that were very upsetting. And sometimes I minimized it, just like you're talking about. Well, I don't know, should I really be this upset? But I'm feeling upset.
Right.
And I remember in one case, and this reminds me of the exit interview that you're talking about. I had a candid conversation with, somebody, a leadership person at a company, about something that I was upset about, where I felt I was being discriminated, for my religion. And the interesting thing is that the leadership didn't realize this was happening at their company, and they were upset on my behalf. And then I saw changes happen as a result, and it did never occur to me that the leadership didn't know this was happening. And I was not minimized, which surprised me. It was like, "Oh, you're taking this seriously?" So
Right.
I'm wondering, just to bring it back to the idea of the exit interviews, I'm just wondering if you ever see situations where people will talk about, this was my experience, I was discriminated or harassed or not encouraged. It could be very subtle. Could be, I didn't get the same kind of fair encouragement to grow, and the leadership doesn't even realize this is happening at the company. Do you ever see anything like that?
Definitely, I think that happens. It's like the bigger the company gets, I think the more often that occurs, where leadership, because leadership, of course, sets the tone for the organization. They set the expectations, etc. So the leadership may, say that they're equitable and inclusive, but sometimes, at mid-management level, that message gets lost. So I do think that there can be that gap where the executives are not aware of what's happening. They're saying this, they're expecting this. However, on the supervisors and managers are being bullies in a lot of instances, and harassing their workers, but it's left unchecked. Or I know I had an experience where I used to work where I had a situation come up. I spoke with my manager's manager, and it became like my takeaway from it, the conversation was that we're kind of just waiting for this person to retire. Right. Right. And it's just like, but then, as an employee, you're leaving employees to suffer until this person decides to retire. So I do think there are instances where leadership doesn't know, but there's also instances where leadership maybe does know, but they still don't do anything. So I'm glad in the example you shared, Sandra, that leadership took what you said seriously, and they responded quickly, and you felt so supportive. That is doing DEI well. What I'm saying is sometimes we see DEI, they just don't do anything, right? And that's not okay, because again, people are then suffering and then will not come forward and say anything because, okay, I said something once, nothing happened, I won't bother. And then as someone said, good people leave, Michelle. Good people leave this organization. And I guess it's because people get frustrated too.
To me, this brings us to the idea of the missed opportunities. And, I just want to flip the DEI equation upside down a little bit. And instead of looking at the leadership level, look at the lower rungs of the org chart and, just talk a little bit about how people maybe don't understand the power that they really have. And my impression as a coach and consultant is that often, and I speak about managing up. So to me, this relates to that concept where instead of thinking about you're a manager, you manage your team. If you have a supervisor, you also have a role, if you take it, to manage your supervisor. And so, the what do they call it? The tail wagging the dog, leading the dog. I got that wrong. So I just want to ask you a little bit about your thoughts, with potentially employees who don't see themselves as having power, maybe not realizing how much power they really do have if they chose to take it, whatever that means, to speak up, to start, a new system. I like practices where people will have a regular way of airing out uncomfortable things and making them comfortable, whatever it looks like, a way to practice conflict or just to suggest some kind of new initiative to your supervisor and be the champion of that. Do you have any ideas on this question, Michelle?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, it's a wonderful way to look at it in terms of, yeah, managing up or even managing like kind of sideways. So the influence that, non-management staff has on your peers, right? So how can you influence people's actions and behaviors and thoughts? You can often do that on a peer-to-peer. So, you're going out for coffee or you're having lunch together. It's maybe an opportunity to say, oh, we had that workshop yesterday or this morning. What do you think about that? I found it really interesting that the person said X. Have you ever thought about that? And you're having these informal, but usually really important conversations where people feel comfortable with each other to say what's on their mind, what's in their heart. Maybe sometimes in those conversations when you're hearing, what, this happened to me, the other department I used to work at or in the other organization I used to work at, again, people are feeling comfortable. So I think there's that opportunity peer to peer to do this work and to have those conversations. I think also a lot of time, as you're saying, starting new initiatives or maybe joining committees where you can do things that are fun, that are, important to you, issues and topics that are important to you, and also that grows your skill set. So maybe you're good at planning and organizing. So joining a committee where you're planning and organizing events to celebrate different cultures or to have these town conversations on whatever topics. So I think there's also those opportunities for frontline staff or non-management staff to kind of step out of your job role and responsibilities to do other things that are aligned with your values, aligned with your interests, that doesn't require that hierarchy and that reporting structure. I know for me, I did that a lot in the last role that I had, where I was, chairing a committee with senior executives who were, chairing the committee and meeting people from across the organization who I wouldn't have met otherwise, and outside volunteers. So it was a really fabulous opportunity on that committee that, again, didn't have the structure, wasn't, and allowed me to use my strengths to do a number of different things that really helped to really push forward the conversation. And then I think the managing up, some people, will, like, I'm pretty big on that, like you managing the person that supervising and working with you, particularly if they don't have the skill sets of a great manager. And then the manager comes to me and said, "Oh, what should I do?" And I'm like, "I'm not telling you what to do. That's your job. That's not my job." And they kept asking me, like they seemed really stuck and really struggling. I was like, "Oh wow, this is almost heartbreaking that as a leader that you don't know what to do, and then you're coming to staff." So okay, eventually I said, "Well, you should do this, this, and this." But to me, it was like, you should know that. And this person didn't like to go to trainings, didn't like leadership development opportunities, and so it showed, and it showed up in those, in those moments. So I think it's also really important for organizations. And I spoke to someone in HR, or the person who, did some work in HR, like, how are you taking into account diversity, equity, and inclusion when you're hiring people and putting people into leadership positions? And she said, "Oh, that's a really great question. And yes, we are. I have to, because I'm hiring people who will run the organization into the future. So ensuring that people have a good understanding of it." But I think what happens in a lot of instances is that people sometimes know the language, so they can talk about it in their interviews. But I don't know if everyone always had the tactical, practical capabilities to really do the work. So I think that's a thing that organizations need to be looking at. When you are promoting folks, do they have the capacities and capabilities to do DEI and to do it well? So not that they know the language and the words. All of us can Google, like we can all chat GBT it. We can figure it out what to say. But do they know how to do the work? I think is kind of the next level when we're looking at leadership within organizations.
So we covered a lot of ground, Michelle, in this conversation. I'm just going to ask you one more one more question. So for anyone watching this, if they feel passionate, they feel called to, making improvements at their firm, and maybe they're not in leadership, or maybe they are, but the firm has never done anything beyond, the basic requirements, but they're hesitant. So let's say somebody is passionate about doing this, but they're hesitant. Well, I love how before you talked about just sometimes it's the small steps. What would be a good first step? Just the first small step. What would you recommend?
So the first, a really good first small initial step might be for that person to figure out who else shares this interest and shares this passion. Start talking with people, maybe putting together a little group. Maybe, we're going to start this DEI committee, for lack of a better term. I'm sure, you can get a better name, but we're just going to start once a week or once every 2 weeks at lunchtime or whenever, just getting together and just talking about it. What are some of the concerns folks have? What would you like to see in the organization? How can we get going on this? Can we get moving? And then maybe having a few of those conversations, maybe inviting someone from management to come in, maybe a union rep if you're a unionized workplace, and just start with informal conversations, kind of figuring out where you want to go next. And I think it's good to find out again who else is interested. So again, you're not doing the work by yourself and you're not feeling burdened by the work. Burnout is really real in this space. So ensuring that you have some support and that you're connected, I think would be a great first step. That's a small step. That's not too overwhelming, right?
It is a small step, and I love how it brought it back to the idea of allyship.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that we talked about today, I feel would be not only helpful towards the DEI cause, but also towards the individual who plays a role in this effort to grow themselves as a leader. You're talking more, you're building more connections, you're inviting mentorship, or you're being a mentor, whatever it is, you're building your own community and your network. And there's all kinds of good that comes from this.
Absolutely. I really like how you were able to see that, Sandra, that this person is going to develop their skills, right? And as you mentioned, in so many different ways. So yes, great opportunity to do so.
Okay, so we promised everyone we would talk about the benefits of DEI, and we did.
That's right. That's right. We did.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michelle, for your time and your insights. I enjoyed our conversation.
I did as well, Sandra. Thank you. You asked really great questions, and I too enjoyed our conversation today.
So everyone listening out there, ask questions, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't need to know everything. Okay.
You don't.
And to our listeners, if you're interested in learning more about Michelle Davis, please go to mvdconsulting.ca. You've been listening to Get in the Driver's Seat, stories about leadership moments in professional practice. I'm your host, Sandra Beckor, practice management coach at Beckor Management. Take care, everybody.